Good day, folks. This is the next video in our Baptist history series. We look forward to going into it with you guys. And so today we're going to be looking at the Reformation period, which is from the year 1400 AD to the year 1600 AD. So let's get started. Let's take a look. So the following centuries are some of the most eventful in all the world's history. So let's take a look back at this history to this point. The Catholic Church, by its many departures from New Testament teachings, its many strange and new laws, a desperately low state of morals, and reeking in the blood of millions of Christian martyrs, who died at a rate of 4 million every 100 years, had become obnoxious to its followers. Several of its bravest, most spiritual priests and other leaders sought to reform many of its most objectionable doctrines and get back, or at least nearer, to the plain teachings of the New Testament. The leaders of the Reformation were all, or had been, Catholic priests or officials of some kind. There was a little good and much evil, but at this time there was not one doctrine of the New Testament that had not been messed around with. In 1320 to 1384 AD, there was a man in England who attracted worldwide attention. His name was John Wycliffe. He was known as the Morning Star of the Reformation, as he was the first priest to make a stand from inside the Catholic Church. He lived an earnest and effective life and was influenced to evangelism by a man named Walter Lollard, who interestingly was a Waldense. So he's part of that group of Baptists we heard about. So Wycliffe was the first to translate the Bible into English, and did so from a corrupt manuscript known as Jerome's Latin Vulgate. This was still a huge step forward, as previously it was only available in Latin and Greek, and even then was kept from the layman and only used by priests. The style used by Wycliffe eventually affected the King James Bible. Wycliffe died of paralysis, but was so extremely hated by the Catholic Church that years later they dug up his bones, burned them, and cast his ashes into water. Next, you have a man called Jan Hus, and in 1373 to 1415 AD, from Bohemia, and he was sparked by the work of John Wycliffe, and he himself sought change in the Catholic Church, but instead of striking a chord among his people, he was feared and hated, and he was burned at the stake. He was a martyr among his own people. The next that came along was the Italian Savonarola in 1452 to 1498 AD. He was born 37 years after the burning of Hus, and he managed to gather quite a following among his brethren, but reformation in the Catholic hierarchy would mean ruin to the higher-ups in that organisation. So, like Hus, he must die. He too was burned at the stake for his efforts. Next up was a man from Switzerland named Zwingli, and in 1484 to 1531 AD, he was born just before Savonarola was killed. And this is when Reformation really started to progress throughout the Catholic nations. Then we have possibly one of the most famous of all 15th and 16th century reformers with Martin Luther, who lived from 1483 to 1546 AD, and he was born in Germany. He was born 1 year earlier than Zwingli and died 15 years later than him, and his predecessors have made his fight quite a lot easier than history may make out. He decided that reform within the Catholic Church was impossible, as he'd already seen these earlier examples of people trying and they were killed before it even came to anything. In 1530, he became the founder of the Lutheran Church, which soon became the Church of Germany, and this was the first new organisation to come directly out of Rome and renounce all allegiance to the Catholic Mother Church, as she is called. Reformation from within the Catholic Church was impossible, for Luther and others being under the Pope's authority, but with this split it became possible. The Church of England, which comes next in the line of churches, was not actually part of this Reformation per se, but was next to arrive through a division similar to the Catholic Church division into East and West, Roman and Greek. King Henry VIII had married Catherine of Spain, but unfortunately after some time wanted to divorce her to marry Anne Boleyn. Only the Pope could grant such a thing, and in this case, for special reasons, he did not grant it. So being king, Henry thought that he should be entitled to do what he wants. His own Prime Minister, Thomas Cromwell, made fun of him, saying, "Why do you submit to papal authority?" Henry took his advice and decided to throw off this papal authority and made himself the head of the Church of England. This was not a true start to Protestantism, as Henry died in the Catholic faith. There were some marked changes in the Catholic Church at this point, until the rise of a new monarch, the daughter of King Henry VIII, and the divorced Catherine of Spain, Mary I, aka Bloody Mary. In her 5-year reign, over 300 men and women were executed as she fought to bring the Catholic Church back to where it was under the Pope. This continued, but with the taste of freedom still in their mouths, and Mary and her archbishop dying within days of each other of a flu epidemic, arose Queen Elizabeth I to the throne, the daughter of Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn, who again overthrew papal authority and brought the Church of England back. So going back to Europe now in 1509 to 1564, we meet a man named John Calvin. He was a Frenchman who was living in Switzerland, and he was a contemporary of Martin Luther for 30 years and 22 when Zwingli died. He is credited with founding the Presbyterian Church just 11 years after the founding of the Lutheran Church. It too was led by a Reformed Catholic. It is important to note that in the beginning Luther and Calvin both believed in changing back to believers' baptism by immersion, but soon abandoned this when persecution came. And they were labelled Anabaptists and returned to the Catholic doctrine they once held. So they went back from the belief that they changed over to baptism by immersion, believing it to be scriptural, and then they went back after persecution came. In 1560, 19 years after Calvin's first church in Geneva, Switzerland, John Knox, who was a disciple of Calvin, established the first Presbyterian church in Scotland, which 32 years later became the Church of Scotland. So now we have the 5 established churches, which are the Roman Catholic, or the Eastern, the Greek Catholic and Orthodox, or the Western, the Church of Germany, which is Lutheran, the Church of England, Protestant, and or Anglican, and the Church of Scotland, which is Presbyterian. These 5 state churches were all bitter in their persecution and hatred of the people called Anabaptists, the Waldenses and all the other non-established churches which had never had any connection to the Catholics. So even though Baptists had supported continuously and valuably fought with them, it was quickly forgotten by the three Reformed churches, who soon returned to the persecuting business like their Catholic mother, and also were established state churches like her. So the Baptists had once again fled persecution into their various hiding places worldwide, suffering horrendous casualties, yet not entirely wiped out. As we've said before, God always reserves a remnant of faithful believers. So the Reformed churches, all of these Reformed churches of Germany, England, Scotland, and the Catholic churches have retained all of the most hurtful errors. They all had preacher-church government. They all had unified church and state. They all baptized infants. They all baptized by sprinkling and pouring. They all taught baptismal regeneration, and they all persecuted others, at least for many centuries. So that was the Reformation period. In a nutshell, you have these 5 churches that were established, these state churches, which have birthed many other different things coming out of them since. But we see that these churches all came from the Roman Catholic Church. They were all started by Catholic Reformed people. So this is where we are at. We still have the Baptists, who are being persecuted by all these churches, and they're being persecuted in the same way that the Catholics used to persecute people that were outside of their belief system. So later on, we're going to look at we're going to look at some of the peace treaties that were done in that time period. So yeah, it's going to be an interesting look. And once again, thanks for watching. That was the Reformation in a nutshell, and we will have a look at some more at what's going to happen next in this story. So thanks again. We'll see you next video. Thanks.